This is a 2005 Porsche Carrera GT, and in fact, it's my 2005 Porsche Carrera GT. I can't believe it. I believe this is the greatest sports car ever made. It is my favorite car of all time, my dream car for 17 years, 6 months, and 25 days, and now I have it. Today, I'm gonna show you around my Carrera GT and tell you about my journey to get here. Before I get started, be sure to check out Cars and Bids, which is my enthusiast car auction website for cool cars from the modern era with free listings. You can list your cool car for free and auction it on Cars and Bids. And we've had some great sales recently, including this wonderful Sprinter van, 4-wheel drive camper conversion, brought almost $70,000. This amazing E46 BMW M3 sold for just under $30,000. And this wonderful Mercedes CL63 AMG brought $46,000. If you're looking to buy or sell a cool enthusiast car from the modern era, Cars and Bids is the place to do it. With daily auctions and great selection, check it out at carsandbids.com. Today's video is going to be a little different from my other videos. Today, I'm going to tell you a story. On Friday, February 25, 2005, I saw a Porsche Carrera GT. It was my first date ever. I was 16 years old, I was on my first date, I lived in Denver, Colorado, and I saw a Carrera GT on a surprisingly snowy winter's night, bitter cold, and there it was. People in Denver didn't have cars like that. It was a huge deal to see the car. Couldn't get too excited, I was on my first date, but I went back to school the next week and I told all my friends that I had seen a Carrera GT, which was at that time a brand new car, just came out, and they didn't believe me. They said, "No way you saw a Carrera GT in Denver in the winter, no way, didn't happen." So I decided that I would carry a digital camera around with me from that moment on, and when I saw a Carrera GT again, I would be ready to show my friends. Now, my dad had given a digital camera to my family as a gift. This was before cameras on phones. He gave it to my family. We didn't know what we would do with digital photos. Nobody really used it. The concept of putting a photo on the computer was lost on us. So nobody was really using the camera, so I dusted it off and started carrying it with me in the car everywhere I went. On July 15, 2005, I got a call from my friend Brett Shea. He was in high school with me, and he said, "Hey Doug, I know you've been trying to see this Carrera GT. I'm standing in front of one." He was in Denver, miles away from where I was, and I dropped everything I was doing and drove as fast as I could with my digital camera to see the Carrera GT. And Brett and I stood there for a half an hour admiring this beautiful machine. July 15, 2005. I now had proof of the Carrera GT on my digital camera, and a hobby was born. I kind of enjoyed taking pictures of exotic cars. I was carrying the camera around, so I started taking pictures of other exotic cars I would see on the road. Ferrari 360 was new and hot back then. I would see them occasionally in Denver, and I would take pictures, and then I would post them on web forums or wherever, and it was a lot of fun. It was this new hobby called car spotting, and it started that day, July 15, 2005, taking a picture of that Carrera GT. Now, I continued to enjoy car spotting, taking pictures of exotic cars that I would randomly see on my digital camera and then later my phone, and I continued to do it. And I was featured in Automobile Magazine in the July 2009 issue, an article about my car spotting prowess. The thrust of that issue was dream big, follow your dreams. So I followed around this guy who dreamed of exotic cars and took pictures of them. And that started on July 15, 2005 with that Carrera GT. Now, that particular issue of that particular magazine was sitting in a newsstand at the Atlanta airport, and it happened to get picked up by a guy named Scott, who was getting on an airplane to travel somewhere for work. Scott was a car enthusiast, and he worked at Auto Trader, and he was building out a content division for Auto Trader. Instead of just selling cars with car listings, which is what Auto Trader is known for, they wanted to start writing articles about cars. So Scott had the magazine, and he saw the article about me, and he thought, this guy might make for some good content. We both lived in Atlanta at that time, and so he reached out to me and said, do you want to have lunch? So Scott and I had lunch with a few other people, Mike and Ted. If you're watching, I know you know, but I will never forget that lunch. But we had lunch, and within a few months, Scott's department had the content division of Auto Trader up and running. And I was his very first freelance writer. By day, I was still a college student, a college senior at Emory University in Atlanta. And by night or on the weekends, whenever I had free time, I was writing about cars as a freelance writer for Auto Trader. I did that job for 10 years. Long time, always loved it, and it all started with seeing that Carrera GT on July 15, 2005. Now, eventually, I enjoyed writing about cars so much that I decided to quit my day job in an office and devote myself full-time to writing about cars, which, as I look back now, that seems as insane as it probably sounds to you. But I was 22, I didn't really have any responsibilities, and I figured, let's give it a go. And so I started writing, first for The Truth About Cars, which is a little car blog, then for Jalopnik, which at the time was the biggest car blog, and then I got an email from a reader. And he said, your articles, your columns are so funny on Jalopnik, why don't you make videos? This was 2013, and the concept of making videos had never entered my mind. But I had this email, and this guy seemed like he knew what he was talking about, so I figured, let's go make YouTube videos. That was the end of 2013. Now, at first, I made videos about my own cars, but over the years, as the channel started to evolve, I realized that people more wanted to see car reviews than kind of repetitive content about my own cars. Now, initially, I didn't really have access to any cool cars to do car reviews with, so I reviewed some pretty pedestrian cars, Toyotas, Lexuses, whatever I could get my hands on, until September of 2016, when Porsche of Beechwood reached out to me and said, hey, we have a Carrera GT if you want to come and film a video with it. This was my dream car, the car that started it all, and now I could film a video with it. It was incredible to me. So I drove to Porsche of Beechwood near Cleveland, Ohio, and I made a video with the Carrera GT. That video now has something like 4.5 million views, but more importantly, it started my channel in a totally new direction. It suddenly became clear that exotic cars were a possibility. And once people saw I had a Carrera GT on the channel, they started reaching out with other stuff. Within a year of filming that Carrera GT, I had also filmed a Lexus LFA, the new Ford GT, which was just coming out, a huge deal, Lamborghini Aventador SV, and a Ferrari F40. It all sort of snowballed from that original Carrera GT, which itself had snowballed from the original Carrera GT on July 15, 2005. But beyond professionally, the Carrera GT also had a major impact in my personal life. On July 15, 2017, I got married. And yes, I chose that date to correspond to the Carrera GT sighting that had been so meaningful 12 years to the day before my wedding date. I mentioned the Carrera GT in my wedding vows, and the ring bearers walked down the aisle holding little Carrera GTs with the rings tied to them in a sash. And that is how the rings were presented to me on my Carrera GT wedding day. To this day, I buy these little Carrera GT models when I see them for sale, usually at drugstores, pharmacies. They have them in little toy displays, and I buy one every time I see one, and I've bought them all over the world, in Korea, in Mexico City, in Istanbul, and even on the day we brought my little son home from the hospital. I had to run out to CVS to get something we didn't have, and the drugstore was selling a little Carrera GT. It was a great sign, and I bought it. Now, I've driven 2 more Carrera GTs for my YouTube channel since I reviewed that one at Porsche of Beechwood back in 2016. In 2020, I did a full review of the Carrera GT in my new format and showed all of its quirks and features and all the nooks and crannies, and everybody loved that. And of course, I gushed over the car and thought I would never have one. In 2021, the following year, I did a comparison test between the Carrera GT and the Ferrari F40, and I got considerable seat time in both of them thanks to the Triple F collection in Ohio. And it was amazing to drive those 2 cars back to back and to get more seat time in my favorite car, the Carrera GT. But prices of Carrera GTs have gotten insane. This car cost $440,000 when it was new back in 2005. And after some initial depreciation, they started to take off as people realized it was the last gasp of the analog supercar. And now, well, these cost a lot of money. But just last week, you may have seen, I announced a large investment in Cars and Bids, my enthusiast car auction website. From the Chernin Group, who has made a big investment to grow the platform, and many wonderful things are gonna come out of this investment for the business, and I'm so excited to see where it goes. But for me personally, it meant selling a portion of the business, and I've had my eye on one thing. After many late nights editing videos at my desk and driving all over the place, flying across the country and the world to film videos, hiring people, editing, taking the huge risk to create Cars and Bids, and then growing that platform, after all of that, I wanted one important thing: a Porsche Carrera GT. And so the first thing I did when that deal closed, I bought a Porsche Carrera GT. And so this is mine. And let me tell you about it. But before I take you on a tour of my Carrera GT and show you around my new favorite thing, I do want to mention 2 people who are absolutely instrumental in me getting this car. One, Jimmy REPASI, who runs a shop called REPASI MOTORWERKS in Connecticut. Although calling it a shop is doing it a disservice, this is the place to maintain, repair, service Carrera GTs nationally and globally known. At the time he had my car in there doing an inspection, he had 7 other Carrera GTs at the same time, 8 of them in one place, and he is the Carrera GT guy. When you buy a car that REPASI MOTORWERKS has looked at or serviced, you can be confident in that car. Jimmy is not paying me a dime to say that. It is true. Also, huge thanks to Matthew Ivanhoe, the cultivated collector, who helped me find this car and buy it off market. It wasn't listed for sale. He went and found it, did a ton of due diligence, which is tremendously important on a car like this, and he was able to get me the Carrera GT. So thank you, Matthew. It's just a car, but you're also making people's dreams come true. So let's talk my Carrera GT. But before I take you on a tour, it's important to mention this car is not replacing my Ford GT. I have no plans to sell that car. I am tremendously lucky enough to have both of these absolutely amazing cars, and I'm not getting rid of the Ford GT. I think I'm going to use that car more for like typical sports car fun duties, and this will be more for special occasions, car events, that kind of thing. But I will be able to keep both, and I am so lucky to have what I consider to be 2 of the greatest driving exotic sports cars ever made parked right next to each other in the garage. It is truly a dream. But on to the Carrera GT. I'm going to start with color. This car is silver, they called it GT Silver, with a brown interior. Now, there were basically 3 interior options for the Carrera GT, 3 regular ones. There was a brown, which Porsche called Ascot, that's this. There was a red, which Porsche called Terracotta, and then there was a black, which Porsche called gray. I don't know what was going on there. But this car is silver over Ascot brown. Now, as you've seen in this video, I have a particular affinity for the yellow Carrera GT. That's the one I saw back in 2005. That's the one my ring bearers carried down the aisle at my wedding. But yellow is a massive price premium. Porsche only sold about 40 yellow Carrera GTs in North America. They're incredibly rare, and they sell for about 50% more than a silver car. The majority of these were silver. So I decided to skip yellow and not pay hundreds of thousands of dollars extra for a color, and I did what I always do, which is I bought the press color. Silver over brown was the Carrera GT color in all of the press photos, the advertisements, and the auto show when the production version of this car was announced to the public. I have historically always bought my cars in the color of the press pictures, and I decided to do that again here, especially because yellow is so expensive. My decision had been made for me. Now, like I mentioned, this is a 2005 model Carrera GT. Here in North America, all Carrera GTs were either 04 or 05, but because of a lot of production delays early in this car's run, most of the 04s got pushed to 05, so the vast majority of Carrera GTs that came here were 05 models, including this one. This car has 9,960 miles on it, so I will put the 10,000th mile on probably by the time you have watched this video, which will give me great pleasure to actually use and drive this car, which has only accumulated 9,960 miles in almost 18 years. Now, one of the most important things to look for when you're buying a Carrera GT is service history. This is an aging supercar. It's almost 20 years old now, and it is very special. I have skipped a lot of the discussion of what makes this car so great in this video. I figure most people watching already know about the Carrera GT. I have talked about it enough. But one of the most special components of this car is undoubtedly the powertrain, which was originally developed for Formula One racing and then repurposed for Le Mans racing, and then they decided to throw it in a road car. So this is absolutely a racing-derived V10 that's in a street car. And so you gotta be pretty up to date with your servicing, and thankfully this car is. One of the things these are notorious for is the clutch. Difficult to use and tremendously expensive. A new clutch can be $40,000 to $50,000. Thankfully, this car has a new clutch, so I won't have to worry about that for a long while, although the transport driver roasted it when he was backing it off the transport truck, but hey, such is life, we will move on. Other servicing for this car is kind of interesting. One problem the Carrera GT tended to develop was pitting on the camshaft. They would get these little pits, which could obviously cause problems. And so Porsche is replacing Carrera GT camshafts. They are paying for a majority of that repair for Carrera GT customers even to this day. This car is almost 20 years old, but Porsche understands the value of keeping Carrera GT owners happy, and so they are helping out with that repair on 20-year-old cars and paying for the majority of it. I mention that because 2 years ago, this car had its camshafts replaced due to the pitting issue. Now, at that time, this car also had a thorough and comprehensive service to address a bunch of other stuff too, and this is the final bill, almost $60,000 for a service, and that included Porsche paying for a majority of the camshaft repair. So an incredibly expensive service, and since then we've got a new clutch and new tires, and so I am tremendously excited to drive this car now that other people have spent an enormous amount of money making it perfect. Now, this car also came from the factory with a couple of neat trinkets that owners got when they bought it new. And over the years, I've been so obsessed with the Carrera GT that I have amassed kind of a collection of the Carrera GT trinkets, but I was missing two important components. One is an engine. Carrera GT owners got a little replica of the engine when they bought this car new, and I've never been able to find one for sale. But Jimmy REPASI of REPASI MOTORWERKS got me one as a present, like a little gift to go along with the car, as like a congratulations, you achieved your dream. I was so excited. I finally got the engine, and I was showing it to my wife, the final piece of my Carrera GT accessories, and in that moment I dropped it on the ground and broke it. and it came apart, and so now I no longer have the engine. But for 2 hours there, I did have it. And if you happen to have one, send me an email, maybe I'll pay you for it. Now, the other cool thing that came with this car when it was new was a set of luggage. The Carrera GT, very famously, doesn't really have a lot of storage space, but Porsche made a custom designed set of several pieces of luggage that fit into every nook and cranny of the car. This car came with its full set of luggage still intact, and here's a picture of Noodle sitting on my bed next to my Carrera GT luggage. This is so cool to have this full set of luggage for every little space in the car, perfectly matching my Ascot leather interior. In fact, the computer bag of the luggage, the wood handle, perfectly matches the wood on the shift knob of the Carrera GT, which is an amazingly cool touch. Unfortunately, I am terrified of using this luggage. A new set costs $15,000, and so I have placed it in little dust bags in my closet, and I will never take it out. But it is cool to see the Carrera GT luggage. As for the rest, well, you know the rest. The Carrera GT is one of the greatest supercars ever made. Top 5 in pretty much everyone's book. Top 3 in mine. One of the all-time greats. And maybe the greatest analog driver's supercar of all time. So, with that in mind, let's go drive it. All right, time to drive my Carrera GT. Actually, the car was delivered yesterday, and I have been driving it. I've driven it 60 miles already, so I'm edging closer to that 10,000 mark, and there are 3 very interesting things that I've noticed. I've gotten quite a bit of seat time in Carrera GTs before, but not just like driving it around in my normal routine, and so 3 things developed very quickly that have surprised me. Number 1, the Carrera GT is tremendously low. People think of supercars as being low and scraping, but people usually don't think about that with Porsches. It is true of the Carrera GT, insanely low. In fact, this car is going back to REPASI MOTORWERKS this summer, all the way back to Connecticut, to get a new suspension put in from KW. They make a lift kit for it, and that makes the car usable, because in its current state, it's not horrible. You can get over most stuff, but it scrapes a lot of the time. It's just a plastic piece, but there's about 3 inches of ground clearance, and it's not pretty, and so that is a limitation of driving this car. I am surprised at just how low it really is. Number 2, interesting thing I have discovered driving this car around, nobody notices it. Nobody. Now, when I see a Carrera GT, I absolutely lose it. And I freak out and I stand next to it for like 20 minutes looking at all the little details. But to most people, it's a silver Porsche. And when you really think about it, it makes sense. You know, on the outside, it looks cool, but it's not that insane. Most people don't know it's like a race-derived V10 and it's all this craziness. And that's not something that you would just know if you didn't know about cars. And so it's actually pretty under the radar, which I totally wasn't expecting. And which, by the way, I absolutely love. Because you can enjoy this ridiculously expensive, outrageous, over-the-top, incredibly rare supercar without all the finger pointing and the incredulity from people. It's like a secret known only to you. And that's incredible in a car like this. One of the all-time great supercars flies under the radar. And I'm like astonished at this reality, but it is in fact the reality, and I think it's so cool. The Ford GT gets a lot of looks, a lot of interest. This is almost more usable. Pause for acceleration. Woo! That will never get old. The other interesting thing about driving this car that I've learned just driving it around, it's easy to drive. It really, really, really is. It's like a totally drivable sweetheart car. And I've always said that about the Ford GT as well, the one I have, the 05, not the new one. And I really believe it about this car also. And it's so cool to really have 2 of like the most special, drivable, usable, enjoyable supercars. Because so many supercars truly are intimidating and difficult and hard to see out of, and the clutch is hard and the parts are hard to find, and they make you work for the experience. And this car and the Ford GT are such sweetheart cars. They're so fun to drive. And within just 10 minutes behind the wheel of this car, I was throwing it around, downshift, rev matching, like I knew the car well. Now, I have had seat time in these before, but only maybe 4 total hours in my whole life. And so to be able to just jump in the car and start doing that stuff, there's a feeling of comfortability that comes with all Porsches. And that even extends to the mighty Carrera GT. And it's amazing to be in this car, this incredible, hardcore, crazy supercar, and be flinging it around like it's a Boxster. But you really feel that level of comfort with this car. And I think that is the thing that blows me away the most about Carrera GT ownership so far. It's easy to drive. And since nobody looks at it, you can take it anywhere, except that it scrapes everywhere. Now, aside from those things, I've pretty much covered the entire rest of my feelings about this car in my other reviews of it. But I will say, truly amazing engine note, one of the all-time greatest ever. Probably the all-time, or maybe LFA, maybe 1 or 2 other cars, but this is one of the greats. It is also a truly special analog supercar that is incredibly good at everything. Unbelievable stability on the highway, and poise at incredible speeds, fantastic shift and clutch action, very easy to operate. The clutch is notorious in these cars for being a challenge to get going, because you basically have to let all the way off the clutch before the car starts moving. That is true. It is annoying, especially on hills. I will get used to it, I suspect, but it's still annoying. It makes things difficult, especially when you think about the dollars involved in the clutch and in any body damage. But once you're moving, it is the greatest clutch, the greatest shifter feel of basically any car in history. And I love how mechanical it is. I love how communicative the steering is. I love how light the car feels and eager. It is an eager car. That's probably the #1 word I would use to describe it, which, when you think about the lore of $1 million supercar, you don't think eager and fun, but that's what this is. It kind of kicks the trend of other incredibly expensive supercars by just being usable and fun and exciting. And I love it. I truly believe this is the greatest driver's supercar ever made, and I am so thrilled that I get the chance to drive it. And I cannot wait to enjoy this car over the coming months and years. And I never say forever with cars, but this has been a dream for so long, and it is so special, and I am so glad to finally be behind the wheel of my Carrera GT. And so that's my 2005 Porsche Carrera GT. I can't believe it. I can't believe I am saying those words after all this time. And I'm thrilled that you have been able to follow along with my journey with this car over the last few years on my channel as I've reviewed these cars and talked about it and wanted it and loved it and said it's the greatest sports car ever made and pined after it and needed it. And now here it is. It's an incredible moment for me, and none of this would have been possible without you. And it is indescribably meaningful to me to achieve this dream with you. So thank you.